Hi, guys. It's me, and we do have a surprise person show up, Andre. When I set up my first thing yesterday, Sean had said he might make it. Sean, unfortunately, is tied up in a meeting where he is working with walkers in Wisconsin. And he was supposed to be free, but they're having him work the noon to 2 shift. Watch those guys. He's having a wonderful time in Wisconsin, by the way. He's very pleased with what he's seeing up there. And Andre and I were talking about this. I'm going to get to the questions that got sent to us at the very end of the session. So, because Andre has lots of things he's doing these days, keeping us all informed. Hello, Andre Carr.
Hi, nice to be with you again.
It's great to have you here. And this is how you can see Andre. This is if you want to contact him. And I'm going to leave that up for a little bit so people can get that information. Anyway, so Andre and I were just discussing, I was showing him my charts about senators it took me 3 hours to put this stupid chart together because there's no place that has them all listed just in one place. I had to go to into Ballotpedia and load up each state, find who was running. And then I marked the yellow people are the ones who are in office. And the red ones would be the opponents that are not in office. And then there are places like Indiana where it's 2 new people. And so neither of them are an incumbent. Like Arizona, neither of them is an incumbent. So what do you think about the Senate, Andre? And we can go look at this when we get places you really want to look at.
Yeah, I think it's super close. It's super close. Right now it's a 50-50 tie, and it comes down to 9 or 10 key races.
Which states do you think are key?
Well, places like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Montana. There's this has been published. It's actually a list here. I can, Montana. So right now, Michigan is, that's where Stabenow is retiring. So that's a key race. Ohio. So that, and those are races that you have to hang on to, that sometimes the person is already Democratic, whoever's been there.
Yeah. And Rogers, who's running, when you talk about Michigan, Rogers was a congressman. A very highly placed in the House.
Correct.
The Republicans. And Slotkin is a locally known person in Michigan.
Correct. And so that's one. And there's Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is trying to hang on to his seat. Casey in Pennsylvania, that's a key race as well. Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. And then you get, as you said, the Arizona Gallego versus Lake. That's Kirsten Sinema's seat. And then Nevada is really important too, Rosen and Brown. And then an example of what you were saying, I thought I heard you say that you think in Nebraska.
Yeah, in Nebraska, what's happened is Osborne is an independent, and I marked him. And when Sheila and I read it, we got that he was going to make it. Fisher is incredibly unpopular there as a Republican. I mean, she is a real hair on fire MAGA person. And the farmers in Nebraska don't think that, they're beginning to understand how they got sold out into foreign markets and how it's hurt their crops. So.
Right. So, I mean, bottom line, if you go with the logic, which is that they need 7 of those 9 in order to keep their 50-50 status, which would allow Tim Walz to break the ties. Right. I totally can see 6. Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada. I can see those 6. Then it gets dicey because Tester is not doing too well in Montana. Do you think Tester can come back? It's possible, but it's hostile territory.
Well, the story that broke on the guy who was running against him, the guy who's running against him is a gazillionaire who doesn't really live in Montana. He does own land there. He owns a ranch that he turned into a hunting reserve.
Right.
And he was put in there by a bunch of millionaires that want to take over the farmers. They want to buy up the public lands that a lot of farmers do use, ranchers and things do use, but they pay the federal government for it, and they want to set it up so they're not. And he said he had a war wound and all this stuff. Well, they've now dug up the paperwork from the park that he was in when he shot himself accidentally. So it's not a war wound. He doesn't have a war wound. And that has not gone over well.
Right. Well, so perhaps he can come back. I will tell you that when I looked at Tester's astrology, and it's limited because I don't know his birth time, I just know his birthday, but it didn't look that great, to tell you the truth. I mean, I thought,
what did we get for him? I think we had a split decision on him. He's here. He's there. No, I think we both finally came out that it came up to the dem. But what Sheila and I saw, this was a week ago, we saw that something was going to break against Sheehy that was going to help Tester. And then that story broke, and the 2 park rangers that wrote up his accidental self-shooting conferences and things in Montana this weekend.
well, that would be the 7th, if that happened, right? And if not, then you need to make it up somewhere else to get the 7th.
Nebraska's replacing 2 senators because Bob Sass retired, and so they put a temporary person in until the next election. And between Love and Ricketts, we thought that was too close to call. I don't have charts, and we did a lot of these with our dowsing rods.
Right. So you're saying that in Nebraska, you're saying too close to call.
Yes. And normally you just say Ant's Republican, but there's something going on. And you got to realize Nebraska is near Minnesota, and there's a lot of people there that are going to relate to Tim Walz.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's possible, but this is the thing, that in the U.S., places like Nebraska, Texas, they're pretty hostile, and people, they don't necessarily vote. They'll vote for someone they don't like even before they vote for a Democrat. But hey, fingers crossed. I mean,
what's happened in Texas is not only is Colin an incredible candidate and is Cruz an idiot, but I mean but we've elected more than our fair share of idiots. But since between January 1st and September 1st in the state of Texas, 580,000 people registered to vote that had never been registered before. And when I finally saw that number put together, I went, wow, that's a lot. And then Sean could get in and see the data behind it. And 80%, 67, between 67 and 73% of them were female. And they were in the younger age group. So it's all our young people who have never really registered to vote. They're registering to vote. And none of those numbers are anybody taking into allowance when they're looking at the numbers in the state.
So are you saying Sean is optimistic about
the
Texas races?
Yes. In general. I mean, of course, we don't elect our governor. We have an off-cycle governor. Our governors don't get elected in the federal cycles.
Well, that would be huge if Allred could unseat Cruz. Huge.
Well, not only that, but if Allred unseats Cruz, he's going to pull a lot of other Dems people will vote for him if they're really coming in on those issues. And they've done they've really had the people out in the streets. They've really been doing a lot of field work in Texas. And the other thing is, I had a map, and I can't reproduce it in a way I can show it on a screen, but it was where we found the 580,000. people had changed, and they showed the candidate where the most change in voter registration happened. They were dark green, and then the next was light green, and then where the most voter registration had changed, where there was a drop in registration, was dark purple, and then some pinkish purple ones. And where Ted Cruz got the majority of his votes the last election, that's the area that had the greatest reduction in registered voters. And a big chunk of that is due to COVID. Because they've caused a lot of our hospitals in the rural areas to be closed. But Dallas, Tarrant is Fort Worth, Collin, which is a county just immediately above me, which is turning more and more and more Democratic every day, and Denton, which is one of the fastest growing counties. They were all dark green, and so was the counties around Austin and then around Bexar County, which is San Antonio. They call it the I-35 spine. It runs straight down the state, and off of that, it just reflected out. And there are areas that we saw growth in number of voters that we haven't seen in years. So, the women that have lost reproductive rights, and the ones who actually lost children or almost died themselves, they're all over our news. You can't turn it on. They're not putting the faces up. They're putting what they're doing to you up. And we've had early voting turnout like nothing I've ever seen. And we're in the second day of it.
Yeah. Well, and it comes down to that. If you assume, and it's still an assumption, but if you assume that Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada go blue, then you need either Tester or Cruz, or maybe in Florida, which apparently the prognostication is that it's less likely, even though they're closer. So that's another possibility. Scott and the woman he's running against. And then there's it looks like an outside shot now, even though his astrology looks really good to me, but it may not be enough, is Kuntz against Hawley. And some people say that they cannot seat him. I mean, and again, Missouri. So it used to be back in the day when McCaskill was there, but then Hawley came in the MAGA era, and
well, every major newspaper in Missouri has supported Kuntz.
I could totally see that, yeah.
And every major, and trust me, when the Dallas Morning News, it endorsed Colin Allred, it is not a liberal rag, let me tell you. It is a very conservative newspaper, but their whole thing was the economics of it. We can't have a senator that doesn't take care of business. And they feel like his attitude towards the structure in the state, towards the power and the other things that the governor screwed up, don't help. So I'm more enthused than I was 2 weeks ago, and I'm more enthused than I was a week ago.
Well, you were saying though that probably the one thing that I did like when I was looking at the chart of Chuck Schumer, who is he's the Senate leader, so you would expect good patterns, and I like his patterns even more in 2020 when he did get the Senate time. Now, without being quite as powerful, they're still really good. And so that definitely gives me hope. But I would be quite amazed if we had more than, say, tops, 51 seats, and maybe it would be a tie. I think beyond that, I don't know, that would incredibly surprise me, if something crazy happened, like Democrats had 53 or 54 seats.
Yeah, and we can't expect you to write everybody's chart. And besides the fact, a lot of them have kind of figured out, don't let anybody know your birth time.
Well, the birth time for sure. Birthday, if you are reasonably well known, it will show up and you can get it. Although then what happens is that you draw this chart that you kind of go on the feeling of the overall pattern without an ascendant. Like, to give you an example, the ascendant, which is the rising sign.
Right.
And I can do really good work for any person in terms of an individual chart without a time. That's not a problem because I tap into big patterns in astrology that are
Mhm.
still extremely useful. But when you're looking at for example, the presidential race, a lot of what I say about Kamala Harris is because her ascendant is getting a Jupiter
Mhm.
transit, and that's when Clinton was elected in 92 and Obama in 08. Jupiter on the ascendant is really powerful.
Mhm.
So if I don't know her birth time, I don't know what the ascendant is, right? So this is where people like Casey, Colin Allred, Coons,
Mhm.
Colley, I don't know their ascendant. I just know the day they're born, and that's what I go on, right? The feeling of that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Anyway, that's so. And I saw you did a thing about the U.S. chart in general.
Well, it's in general, but it's highly specific, and that it's something happening in the US chart, which is that you get these lunations. It's 248 years. And so you look at the days after the formation,
Mhm.
and it's really interesting that new moon after new moon, going back into the 19th century,
Mhm.
whenever you get new moons, the country features progressive administrations, even when they were the type of administration that at the time was Republican, because back in the 19th century, they were the ones
Yeah. Well, they
defending
were.
against, yeah,
Yeah.
like Teddy Roosevelt and Ulysses Grant. And then you have FDR, JFK, Bill Clinton. We're on another one again. And,
Mhm.
and then to even add more fuel to the fire, so to speak, I noticed that the degrees align really well with Kamala and not with Trump. So that's a clear pathway that way. But that's the presidency. You see, the Senate is another story. And there's another model, or rather another, I don't know what you call it, meta system. Like when you look at a really big picture,
Right.
we are in the echo, where the planets today echo the Civil War positions. And that's why the country is in a cold civil war. Like at minimum, you can see the MAGA people versus the Democrats in a very, intense uh, type of energy where both sides diminish each other heavily. And then there's the fact that we're in a gender war as well. It's pretty clear that there's a
Mhm.
gender war. In fact, Trump is trying to masculinize the whole thing. All his messages. I mean, this whole Arnold Palmer thing, you ask yourself, why is this guy talking like this? Trump is thinking by throwing all this profanity, male genitalia
Mhm.
into the ecosystem, I can motivate, some men that are in their basement upset about the way women are rising or women treat them or whatever. It's the idea that, a la Putin, it's the male power. And Kamala is pretty clearly representing the female side of this. And the advantage to Kamala is that we're in a time when women are upset for very good reason, and they're going to vote in large numbers. So I'm with
Mhm.
you on the idea that if you tell me, hey, look in Texas, we got a 10-point edge, women versus men, that can only be good. Yes, 100%. It increases the chances that you get a tip over, and
Mhm.
you might get an upset somewhere, right? So there's a lot of patterns circulating, but the thing is that the fact that the planetary patterns echo the Civil War, you have to be realistic and assume that even with a win, you're not going to get a big win. That was always happening then. The country was super divided. They couldn't
Right.
agree on anything, and they had to make compromises and so forth. In fact, that election that pretty much ruined the Reconstruction pattern back
Yes.
then was because the election was super close. They were getting into a big fight. The progressive side
Mhm.
won, but they had to make concessions, right? And
Oh
equally,
yeah.
yeah. So it's complicated.
Well, it was what brought the pressure that really brought on the Civil War was with the other states that were forming and coming in, the ones west of the Mississippi, and historically they were not going to let them be slave states. And they could count on their hands if they're living in Georgia and Florida and stuff. If we've been barely able to hold on to our slave state status as it was. So They didn't want to let them in, and that was a big part of it. And then the next election, which was, now how are you going to redivide this? A lot of the people out there were not organized enough to really vote. I mean, their state governments were so new, they were so young. And and the other part was, like in a state like Texas, I know a lot of people at the first generation of their family that lived in Texas was after the Civil War, because they'd been driven out of wherever they lived before. That's both black and white. You know, their families came from other places, and it was really, we have so many different pressures on us. I was going to do a whole show on happiness. Not that you're not delightful, Andre, but it was really a guy who studied happiness, because the US last year in 22, we were 20th in happiness in the world survey. This year we're 23. And he discussed what's pushing it. And what's pushing it isn't the older people, like you would think, thinking about who's out there watching the Trump thing. It's the younger people who feel stressed, irritable. They have too much fatigue. They suffer from lots of small illnesses like headaches, and they're just worried about where they're going to be in 10 years. That's the group that's upset. And I'm sure there's something, if we did enough of their charts, there's some part of their generation that there's going to be the worriers.
Well, in the longer term, I mean, where some of what I'm saying, or most of it, really is looking at the next 2 to 4 years, rather than going beyond. So, of course, yes, absolutely. But in the near term, it's totally logical that they would be upset. It makes perfect sense. When you look at what their older generation is leaving them, it doesn't lead to a lot of optimism.
Well, no, it doesn't. I didn't realize till I was looking at this whole sort of historical look back, and the last year that you could enter the workforce with a college degree or without one and expect to be able to buy a home and do all that stuff was the year I entered the workforce, which was in 71. And of course, when you're in the having kids, acquiring things, you just kind of struggle along, and you figure everybody's struggling the same way. But I know when I look at the situation my children are in, all three of them are, and even the last one's is in an incredible field, but it's really been very, very difficult. Anyway, I have a question for you about this. Have you ever done Mike Johnson's chart?
I've looked at it. He's another one that I have no birth time. I have a birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I do remember back when he came in and talking with Linda, she had her perceptions around it.
Mm-hmm.
And it struck me that based on his chart, he was going to skate through better than people thought. Because there were people saying, this guy's going to go down in flames, just like Kevin McCarthy. That was not there. In fact, even now, as pitiful a person as he is, because this man is corrupt from head to toe, a person who's a lawyer, and the way he's carrying on, he was part of the insurrection. He defends Trump's totally indefensible garbage, but his chart is not that bad, at least based on the day, right? But what it would take is the kind of birth time, that would sink him.
I'll tell you, I don't have to flip a card. I don't have to swing out my dowsing rods or anything. Any person who claims they're an adult person in this society who's never had a checking account, they're hiding something. He's never had a checking account.
So how does he operate?
I have no idea. That's why how could you where does his paycheck go?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, and he also did the thing with that whole thing on pornography and his son and all that. I mean, this party has become a party of cranks and weirdos. Tim Walz is not that far off when he says these people are weird. They're strange people with really toxic ideas, and but yet Johnson, I mean, ask yourself this question. This thing where he skated through, more than once, he used Democratic votes, which is considered a major sin. And he funded Ukraine against the wishes of the Orange Maniac. So there's that to consider as well. In terms of at least what ends up happening is that he helped the national cause, because most of these MAGA people seem ready to burn everything down. And yet I remember Johnson saying, hey man, I've looked at the intelligence and I think we need to fund Ukraine. So he's got at least that much common sense. But
okay, apparently all of his money goes through some church he supposedly owns.
yeah, so and does that surprise you? I mean, isn't this the same like Bill Barr and people like that, Josh Hawley, they're like they want to implement that kind of Christian nationalism as the ruling.
When I worked at American Airlines in the 70s and the early 80s, we had a bunch of pilots that formed a church. And it took the IRS 12 years to bust them. But they were pouring all their money through that church and not paying federal taxes and all this other crap. So anyway, so there's no end of weird in the
there's no end of weird and corrupt and to be honest, pretty disgusting, because you watch these guys and by the way, Johnson was on TV talking about defending Trump's indefensible comments about the enemy within and all that stuff, or talking about Arnold Palmer's junk, and they sound like they're mentally ill, the way they like you're telling them, look, this is what he said. Oh no, he didn't say that. What do you mean? Or who's they? They can't answer anything. They just can't.
And when he says in the statements, he counts Adam Schiff as one of those people. I mean, What party do you think he's talking about?
Exactly. No, I honestly, to me, the greatest retribution, because he's always looking for retribution. The retribution might be if Kamala Harris makes Adam Schiff the Attorney General. How do you like them apples? That's what I would do. Or at least offer it to him.
Yeah. And this is a problem in some states. She lives in Alabama, and if she votes all blue, but there's no blue down the ballot, and I'm concerned it will kick my ballot out and not when it's hand counted. What's my experience? They'll count you if you voted for Kamala. They'll leave it alone because it's not going to make it a bit of difference. They're not going to mess with your ballot until you're going to make an appreciable difference. And I lived a long time in Texas, and the problem of not having candidates on the ballot is your people who would vote for Democrats just don't go vote because there's no Democrat to vote for. There's literally been years where there was no Democrat to vote for.
Yeah, and I mean, in reality, Alabama is a bit like where I live. I'm in Washington State. They're not going to win here, or they're not going to win in California, just like we're not going to win in Alabama. It all comes down to the battleground states, So because with Alabama, what you get is an addition to the popular vote, but it's extremely unlikely, that you're going to elect Democrats.
Still go vote for the person I think's most qualified.
Oh, for sure. And by the way, sometimes you get those shockers that become like the canary in the coal mine when you get. In Alabama, I think this happened. They elected a Democrat somewhere, which was really unexpected.
Oh, that's because the guy that was running against him was such a pervert. I mean, he had warrants, so he couldn't go in shopping malls because he was molesting kids or something. I mean,
it reminds you of Roy Moore when he went down in Alabama, right?
That is Roy Moore. That's that's when the Democrat won, because Roy Moore was such a perv.
Yeah, no, and there have been other places. I know that Jacksonville and Louisiana too, where you get major upsets, and I look at those as maybe not necessarily it's going to tilt the entire state, but it's a canary in the coal mine as far as the country. I remember Sean saying this, that focus on the voting, focus less on polls and more on how people are voting, much like now, for example, when you see big returns in Pennsylvania with big gaps in the gender and lots of Democratic votes, that's a good thing. That tells you much better where it's going than, quoting me all kinds of polls.
And this is good for you, Rose Blue. She voted on the second day, which is today, because she's in Texas. And I wore my Harris shirt inside out. Yeah, because if you go in with anything that looks promotional, for a candidate, they'll strike you. But this is what I wore there yesterday. And I do change my clothes regularly, people, honestly. But let's see. See, it's a wave with kitties in it. It's the blue wave for cat ladies. That's what the T-shirt's about. And the lady standing next to me in line looked at it and she saw what it was. She kind of giggled. But since it didn't have Harris's name, they couldn't throw me out. They wouldn't on that. Anyway, the poll I vote at is really nice. My kids went and voted there. If you're in the Dallas area, it's called the Addison Convention Center, and it does not have a line. It's got lots of workers there, and it's a new one. I learned how to search the polls a long time ago. When I had candidates, I always wanted them to be at the poll that was most used if I wanted them to work outside. So I've learned how to read all those. And so I went and voted there the first day, walked right in, was in and out in 15 minutes. So, and we have 18 propositions for the city of Dallas to change its city charter that are also on there. Those things really slow you down.
Yeah, here in my state, it's all mail. So we got our ballots.
Oh, yeah, you get to sit at home and don't have to worry about any of that.
Yeah, well, then you do have to go drop it off. But yeah, it's pretty simple. And it's, it's so remarkable that people are so ill-informed because of people like Trump, who play these head games where they make up stuff that's completely false, idiotic. Vote by mail is by far the most secure because you only get a ballot if you're on the voter roll. And, this guy keeps saying, oh, the illegals are voting. How do you get on the voter roll? I mean, it's ridiculous. And then when it comes to your house, they check signatures and they check things like we once voted and you had to pick in the primary Democrat or Republican. And we didn't, we got a text and an email saying, hey, fix this or your vote won't count. So they're definitely on top of it. And the idea that a person would put their signature, even if you're, think about it. Let's say that you are undocumented. That would be the last thing you would do. That's completely moronic. You're going to send in a vote, sign it. You're inviting, the government deporting you. So they'll never do something like that. It's ridiculous that he says these things and Republicans believe it or that anyone believes it at all. It's just pure garbage.
They believe they're eating cats and dogs.
It's just ridiculous. It's just it's so contempt.
We have to waste our time on it. Let me see if I've got any more. This is not the most political crowd you've ever seen. Rose, I don't know where you're seeing that because she's saying that all of the Republican judges who are running unopposed. I think you live outside of Houston. That's what I'm thinking, maybe north of me. But for the state Supreme Court justices, they all had candidates. They all had a Democrat running against every single one of them this time, which is a good thing because that's how you get new judges in, especially when you're going to have, I think it's going to be a sweep election. I think people have kind of had it in this state. 700 people died when Cruz went to Mexico and left the state while it was freezing when our power grid went down. At the end, it totaled up 700. And granted, we're a big state, but that's a lot of people.
It's true. It's true. Unquestionably. I mean, Cruz is he's at the bottom of the barrel. He's really quite something. I would love to see the last of that guy.
Yes, you're not alone. It didn't hurt Colin to go into this race knowing he's running against someone. One time, dear Miss Lindsey Graham, who's lost his mind completely, was on a show and said if they found Ted Cruz dead in the middle of the Senate, they would never be able to figure out who did it because he was the most despised person in the Senate.
Yeah, yeah, he's really something, no question. You know, and it's one thing to say your personality is not likable, but you know, it's another to say that you know the person is just you know a complete liar and a scoundrel. I mean, I remember that when I first saw him in 2010, 2011, when he came in on that, you know, when in the that election way back when,
Hmm.
and he was the one who engineered a government shutdown, and when it was known, and he was going on TV saying the Democrats had done it. And I remember thinking, wow, you guys are really now, you're pushing this to the limit. It's like you're telling me the sun rises in the west, and that's just how it is, or that the earth is flat, and
Hmm.
end of story. That's how he plays. You know, it's similar to what Trump took on later, like just torch everything down, lie about everything.
Hmm.
And as you said, right? Crisis develops, he gets on a plane and he leaves. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Except Trump doesn't get to run away this time. I don't think.
You know, with Cruz, by the way, in his chart, the what I see there that is hopeful is that I don't know necessarily about losing. I'm hoping for that too. It's possible, but what is clear is that 25, 26, 27, they're difficult years for him. And that could be because he doesn't get in, which would be the best outcome, or
Hmm.
because he's there, but they're not doing as well as they want to, you know, in the Senate, which would mean being out of power in the Senate.
Hmm.
So either or, but I prefer that he would lose. I prefer going with your perception that he just
Well,
wouldn't win.
I mean, it's like I said, I don't have a chart, and I think sometimes astrology charts and the things you work with can be much more totally accurate instruments than what we use. But you know, and Sheila and I, by the end of doing all, there were 34 races that we did, 3 cards for each one of them. So that was a whole lot of reading a week ago, and it's really tired. By the way, if you guys, let's see, do I have it up here? No. If you want a copy of that chart, I will send. I'm going to send it out. It says who. You can see how accurate Sheila and I were. Let's see. But you can write me an. If you write me an email, I'll send it off to you because then you can look at it yourself if you're a reader at home. Um,
Is yellow the ones that win?
Yellow are the incumbents.
And so how do you? And okay, let me just double check. How do you see what? Who
Okay.
is?
Okay. Let me just finish one little thing here and then. How can you tell what our scoring was? Okay. This okay, we're going to blow it up big so we all can see it. In Arizona, neither of those are incumbents, and I pulled out the Cinema was actually on the ballot during the primaries as an independent, but she pulled before voting date. And then Schiff is an incumbent in House, but he is not incumbent in the Senate. And Garvey is, and we saw Schiff winning that one. Connecticut, it's Chris Murphy is the incumbent Democrat. Casey is the person oops, wait a minute, go the other way. Okay.
So basically, the results are what you're saying is D is a Democratic win, and
Right.
R is
And like in Delaware, we had a split, and I was surprised to see that. But because that's Biden's home state.
Mhm.
And then we saw the Democrat. She had more favorable cards, but neither one of them had great cards. Okay. And Hirono she's the incumbent senator there, runs against a guy named McDermott. We saw her clearly winning. Indiana is McCray and Banks, and we saw the Republican clearly winning. King is independent in Maine, and that's a Greek name, and I won't try to butcher it again, but we saw King winning, but he's been in there for a long time. We also looked at Maryland, which is also Brooks and Hogan, and I was sort of surprised to see that because Hogan had been elected as a Republican governor. He's considered a very moderate Republican. but we got also Brooks winning. Warren and Deaton, and we saw D, and for both of us, it was a blowout for Warren. This guy didn't even, his cards may as well have been clear. Slotkin and Rogers, we saw it, but where they see the little equal sign, that means it's really close. And Klobuchar and White, we see her clearly winning. And that's probably going to happen anyway because it's Tim Walz's state. So a lot of people are going to show up to vote for the governor. In Mississippi, we saw the Republican winning. In Missouri, we saw it was too close.
Can you show the other page for a second?
Sure. Yep. Which state are you looking at?
Just checking. Yeah, so it looks like you, I think the same 6 races that I was saying, it looks like you're seeing a D, a Democrat. So then, but you're also seeing Tester and Allred, so then that would be enough. But
right.
So, yeah.
And if Johnson takes it, and in Tennessee, from what they're getting outside the polls, what we saw is Johnson winning, but something very weird. Both those readings were very weird. They had cards in them that we couldn't figure out. It was like something was going on behind the scenes. So that could be to the effect of Blackbird. Allred and Cruz, we put it Allred. I mean, both of us saw him. I think in mine, he had the sun, the ace of wands, and riding into the 6 of rods. So, I mean, that's riding in triumphant. I don't know if you can get much better than that. You know nothing about this race. Geach and Curtis, and both of us, it was just very confusing. We couldn't get a real answer. Bernie's going to win in Vermont. And Kane is going to, Kane, we saw the Republican winning, and Kane's the one who ran as Hillary's vice president for when she ran. Been there for a long time, and I just don't know. I mean, the Republicans, of course, they've got Youngkin in there. He's been trying to push a lot of stuff. Washington, it was Cantwell and Garcia, and we saw the Republican winning there too. And that's, yeah, I mean, but you got to realize, guys, card readers are lucky if we're 70% right about anything.
So Garcia is going to be Cantwell? That sounds.
That's what we saw.
Huh. Wow.
Well, we're getting tired by this time. Elliott and Justice, and we saw the Republican winning that was a Democratic seat. That was Manchin's seat. And then Wisconsin, we saw Tammy Baldwin winning easily, and Wyoming, we saw that, and that would be a change because incumbents normally have the lead. Barrasso has done some stuff that's pissed people off, and the whole state of Wyoming in some ways is up for grabs. People are changing their opinions. There's a lot of people who were Nikki Haley people up there, and they may put him in just to get, when you get people to change their ticket, it helps. Let's see if there's anybody in the. So, yeah, I remember when we saw that one, not Baldwin, but Morrow and Barrasso. I kept saying I think we laid on it 3 times, and we kept getting. It wasn't a strong D, but it was a D. It wasn't a confusing D like some of those where we have equal, or it's a split like Delaware. We couldn't get anything. Sheila got one thing, I got another.
I'm not seeing, like you're saying, Wyoming. Is there even a race there?
Yep. Morrow against Barrasso. Mm-hmm.
Huh. That's strange. That's not showing up in this list here.
Like I told you, I could not find a complete list that I knew. I mean, there was something missing in each part of it. And so I went and I looked on Ballotpedia, and it said that there was a race there. Because there are 33 races, and I've got, it comes to 33, but on this sheet, we have the special in Nebraska. So there's actually 34 races.
Right.
You guys have no idea how confusing this was. But to pull it all together, I did it one afternoon when I was feeling relatively put together. And the other one we saw is kind of weird was Gillibrand and Sapricione. And I remember we didn't mark it as an split or too close because it was her cards were so good. But the other person, whatever they're maybe by running for this office, they've helped themselves move up somehow.
Yeah, well, I would be amazed if Cantwell lost here. That just seems like a bit of a reach, but maybe. I hope not. And yeah, I hope not, because that would be a total bummer.
You're where? Oh, Cantwell, Washington. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, because Cantwell's the incumbent, and by rights they should have, unless something. Maybe the whole western side of the state votes and the eastern side doesn't, because you've got the split between your agricultural base and the city.
That's right, but she's leading by, I mean, even if you don't trust polls, when you're behind 15 points, you're going to
I would be amazed. Like I said, guys, keep this list and circle all the parts where we're wrong. They're very humbling. I asked Sheila, I said, "Do you even want me to put this out like this?" She was like, "Well, won't hurt."
Well, I mean, for me, the takeaway, though, is that if there are a number in there that are really plausible, the Texas, Missouri, Nebraska, Florida, something in there
If
could
you
happen.
got 4, and that means not only 4 more for Dems, but it's 4 less for Republicans.
Exactly. So, and you just need one of those,
Right.
assuming that the other 6 show up, and the patterns there look good. And if the top of the ticket goes to Kamala and vice versa, all of that reinforces. They reinforce each other. So, yeah, in that sense, I'm optimistic, but cautiously optimistic, because for a number of reasons. The numbers tell me that, and this thing about the era that we're in is just super divided, and you just don't get the big wins anymore. Not right now. I mean, it could return, but right now.
But the country was really, it was very split up about things when Carter ran against Reagan. And I don't know if you've ever seen that map, but when the states were all put out, there's only 2 states that Carter and his running mate got. One was Minnesota, where his running mate come from, and Georgia for Carter. Every place else went Republican. Every other state.
Right. Well, right. But the thing is, whatever the split was, I don't think it's as pronounced as now. I mean, the odds now that you get a state such as Wyoming, Washington, Alabama, even Ohio is considered in some quarters. So it's really down to the battlegrounds. There are 7 to 10 states that decide the election. And I mean, Trump can bellow all he likes about California, New York. Forget it. That's not going to happen. Those states are in. And or I mean, take Texas, for example. If Texas goes blue, the election is over.
That's right. And if we continue, and if it settles in, and if we can switch the governor and stuff out in 2 years, the Republicans are screwed forever, because they will never have. I mean, I hate to live in a state that's the game, because it makes it very difficult to run statewide people. You can. Well, Sean's up in Wisconsin now, and they're saying, well, the numbers over here are really big. And he's chuckling because Dallas has 2 million people in it, Dallas County. And when he went up to Massachusetts one time to work, they said, "Are you sure you're ready for this number?" And it was less than 2 million. And he pulled up the numbers for Dallas and said, "I've been cutting and arranging 2 million voters, potentially." And they're like, people don't realize how big it is here. But that's the other part about turning it around or moving it. But there's been, I forget, Colin said, but it's been well over 2,000 children have been born from rape victims since they changed Roe.
Mm.
And we don't have enough people that want to adopt children as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's totally true. And that's probably, it moves in and out of being the topic, at the top of the list, which is women's rights. They'll say the economy this and the immigration that. I think that the gender gap here is huge. It's going to make all the difference because that's such an immediate, clear and present danger that these people have brought about.
Mm-hmm.
That I think it probably is mobilizing gazillions of one-issue voters that they don't care about anything but that, and they will vote.
That's how they shifted the Supreme Court. For years, I worked against candidates, and the only thing the other side talked about was we're going to get the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
And that was their issue. And then I don't know if you ever talked to Sean about it, Andre, but he can go in and look like a Republican. So he went into this Republican meeting with a friend of his who has to be nice to both sides. And it was 2 weeks after Dobbs had been overturned. Dobbs had been put in place. And he said he was sitting there with these Republicans and they had their heads in their hands and they were going, my God, that's the chief way we raised money. We're going to get rid of abortion. Now they've done it. What are we going to raise money on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they knew what a disaster. I mean, a lot of the on the ground people do, and they still do. They don't say it out loud.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. That was the dog caught the cart. They wanted it as an issue, and then the Supreme Court did it. And all due respect to if such a word could ever apply to people like Alito and Thomas, but sometimes you go too far, and then you get the opposite of what you were searching for.
Yeah, and then everybody starts looking at private business, which is really making all of them very scared right now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
No.
do you do charts of anybody on the Supreme Court? Do you have, or this date of birth time thing?
It's the same. Yeah. I don't have a single person on that court. I don't know. Oh no, sorry, I do. I have Alito, and isn't it amazing? I don't have any of the. I don't have Ketanji or Sotomayor, or who's the third? Can't think right now. The third liberal judge. Anyways, I don't have any of those, but I have Alito and Thomas, and I would say Thomas especially looks like the most likely to collapse sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm.
And Alito, it's interesting that Alito, he was really riding high astrologically when they passed Dobbs, and I'm guessing that he was the architect of that.
Oh, he was the one behind it all the way.
Exactly. So, but now in fact, Thomas and Alito, they're in the same astrological range where 25, 26, 27 are really tough years. And in the case of Thomas, because he's had health issues, that's a pretty natural pathway, into that one. And
the other judge is Kagan.
Kagan, right. Well, I don't have Kagan, Ketanji, or Sotomayor, and I have birthdays with no time for Roberts, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Coney Barrett, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it makes it harder. Like, I know some have said Roberts is likely to quit and this and that. If I just go with the day, with which all I got, then you're looking at years before that happens. Same with Kavanaugh too. Kavanaugh right now, on what I have, he is extremely nervous based on his chart because they've been digging into his stuff, and he's probably worried that with the wrong administration, they'll dig even more. So but to go from there to saying, they're going to throw him out, it's really hard, to get rid of these judges once they're in there. Really hard.
It should be a high barrier. We just should not have such sleazeballs in the first place.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%.
Well, Andre, I almost kind of want to apologize to you because I sort of normally Andre and I talk about spiritual values, and I'll invite you back when I'm doing a spiritual day after all this mess is over.
Sure.
But I know when you show up, people are going to want to know what's going on the Full Tilt Boogie. If you would like to leave now, don't. If you had a question, I got them. I'm going to read, unless you want to stay through my doing readings for people.
Yeah, I'll probably, I need to go because I have some things that I need to do.
Yeah, I know. I told you I wouldn't even.
But if there's the spiritual, no, for sure. I mean, look, this is the irony of all this, that I actually relate to the spiritual more than I relate to the politics. It's just that the politics is important too, though, because in a way, with spiritual is like saying, I relate to spiritual, but I never think about the way my body's feeling, and that's crazy. The body's very material, and it's totally related to the spiritual side as well. As an example, it's biblical. The body's the temple. But same with politics. I mean, this is what we're in, and this is, this year especially, it's an existential threat. I mean, once you start considering people like Trump and his like, and his ilk, it's pretty threatening because, well, for example, if someone like Trump is elected, people like you and I are probably at some risk.
Oh, well, honey, we're at risk. We've been at risk since I started reading in the 60s and 70s. We used to have the religious whack jobs outside of where we were having, psychic fairs. And we've been at the top of their list for a long time. Now they also have Democrats at the top of their list, but they have a lot of other people to get before they get to me, and I'm 75, so you got a lot of time left, Andre. So
not that much more.
That's true. Well, not necessarily that you're going anywhere, but this is the other part of it is people are afraid of MAGAs in Florida. She's in Northwest Florida because they're all running around packing guns. And that worries me because before they used to just spread words at me and bad energy. And I can do a lot to ward that off. But a gun, a bullet, I do think I'm allergic to lead if it comes down to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, the only counter to that is that my sense is that the thing that to me is most stellar until I see a major breakdown, and I don't anticipate this, is the U.S. system has quite a strong rule of law system. So a lot of these people that, they do these things, they end up in the slammer for a long period. So, I mean, I don't think it's in your best interest at all to do such things. And for those that are worried about violent insurrections, remember that happened when Trump was in power, which makes it a lot easier for these people that are, belligerent, and they're going to make a statement, they're going to break into the Capitol. He was the president, so it's kind of a, sense that, okay, this is probably safe. It's not safe anymore. And you notice that now, whenever he says, hey, come and demonstrate for me, they don't show up.
No, they don't show up.
So, it's a big lift. He's going to be very angry, and he's going to want them to do something. But, the costs are high when you do that. Criminal record, time in the slammer. By the way, this includes all the horrible things that have happened. We've seen them, whether it's been people shooting up churches, schools, or they went and attacked Nancy Pelosi's husband. These people aren't going to get out of the slammer for many, many years. So if you want to do things like that, realize what's going to happen to you. And that's the logic. And I don't see that changing anytime soon,
No.
The response. So there's
no,
that.
And if you look at it, a lot of the judges that have told the Republican National Party when they've gone in some of these states and tried to rewrite things, the judges that are throwing them out are people Trump put in office. The Federalist Society didn't do the best job ever of cleaning up to only the people that had their mentality. There are some of those people, it's like any other workplace. We've all worked in a workplace where, you'd see somebody sucking up to someone you knew was really repulsive. I was never good at that. That's why I never lasted anywhere. But, there are people who do that, but then when they'd get put in place, they wouldn't be obnoxious. So,
yeah, no, and by the way, probably you and I agree. I don't have any problem with someone who's really conservative.
No.
If they practice their conservative ideology honestly. That's fine with
Mhm.
me. What I have a problem with is corruption. So, for instance, Aileen Cannon, she's corrupt. The 11th Circuit is not
Mhm.
corrupt. They told
Mhm.
her, go take a hike. This is BS. You're making up laws. This isn't true. So I'm okay with them tilting to the right. That's the way the country is. We have two parties. Maybe it'll be like this for a long time. What I don't like is corruption. And for now, exactly what you said. Yeah. Lots of these Trump judges, they look at it, and, I remember in 2020, they were saying, okay, well, you're bringing me a case. Where's the evidence? Oh, we got
Mhm.
no evidence, Your Honor. Well, then what do you want me to rule on? I remember the lawyer saying, "Well, Your Honor, there was a non-zero number of fraudulent whatever." So he said, "Well, then what are you saying? What
Yeah,
are you
why are
saying?"
you standing and wasting my time? Because
Exactly.
courts don't like their time wasted either. And remember this, they got thrown out of
62.
62, and the 63, the one that was in there, he said, you have a point, this piece of paperwork doesn't look right, but it's not enough to be material. So, and the DOJ is hopping in and stopping them from taking people off the rolls. And that's Mark Elias's work. And he showed up in a court this week, and all they did was say, look, this is the case. And the judge said, yeah, we've seen this over and over. He wouldn't even hear the Republican case. And he did it in such a way they can't move up beyond them unless they can restyle the case or restructure their information. So, we've got our guys out there too, kids. So
Exactly. Yeah. I always remind people, some people say, "Oh my God, the roof is falling in." You make it seem like there are no Democratic lawyers, that no one's on the case. They're on the case.
oh,
And
they're
case in
there.
point, no pun intended, what you said, right? That in Georgia, the judges said, you can't come in now, last minute and demand hand counts everywhere. I mean, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You pushed it back. So
Mm-hmm.
that's happening as well. So it's not all this idea that, Trump wants to paint that as though the whole thing is falling apart. Not true. Not true
and
at all.
and Trump has to stay in some sort of a standing up, looking sane, which he can't do anymore, position, or the Republicans that do want to take their party back will be there waiting. Liz Cheney and all the rest of them, they're waiting for new conservative movement. So
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Very true.
next time I see you, Andre, I promise you it'll be on something like happiness. My happiness thing is based on a 40-year study by Harvard University, and it started out with 6,000 people. It's now down to 4,739.
Well, I have something to say about that. So I look forward to it because I've been trying to study the topic through the proactive side of astrology, meaning that a person can be born kind of inclined to be a little happier and someone else
Mm-hmm.
inclined to be less happy. But the whole idea is that whichever way you're inclined, there are principles you can practice that tilt you toward more happiness. And when you tilt toward more happiness, you do better because you're happier, obviously, but your entire life improves. And that's what I'm really interested in.
Oh, well, you got to look up this guy, Stephen. It's Stephan Schwartz. He has a podcast, and he has all of the studies and all the universities he's working with. That's why I like his stuff, because it's very well researched.
Excellent. I will look that up. All right.
He would probably love to come talk to you about that too, because he's like, however you find your way there. One of his theories is, if you have a friend that's within a 2-mile radius of you and they get some really good news and you just hear about it, that will uplift your spirits. And they have now done a study that proves that that's true. Happiness is contagious, just like anger is contagious. Like, I believe that the MAGAs were created out of a kind of mental state they created for themselves.
Mm-hmm. No, true. That's true. Yeah, that's totally true. One of the adages for me myself is the way I see life is good gets better and bad gets worse. So make sure you
Mm-hmm.
stay on the good side.
That's basically that's what, and
Yeah.
Stephen Schwartz is now working on. How can we as a society get things into a better shape so that more people feel the warmth of that and move in that direction? You've been to Scandinavia, right?
I haven't. No. I
Oh,
haven't.
okay. Because that's the happiest place in the world. That's Disneyland in the world of psychology.
Hmm.
But
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. This is the thing that you see that you often see countries that Republicans decry as socialist, Denmark, Scandinavia, like Norway, uh, and then Sweden, to some
Mhm.
extent, Switzerland, then they're happier, even though there's a lot of it's because there's less competition, there are less of those factors that make the U.S. highly innovative but very competitive too, and it makes
Right. Well, I want to know why it's socialism to pay me Social Security, because I lived here, I contributed to society, and I now benefit back. What's the difference between that and the money they give to oil companies just because they exist? And they've actually taken money in some of these countries. When they have a natural resource, it belongs to everybody. It's not just one. The companies are well rewarded for handling it, but why is it socialism if it happens to me and that's such a horrible thing? But it's not socialism to pay them money because they took oil out of the ground that should maybe belong to my great grandchildren. Who knows?
Yeah, well, even for any reason, if if you give, this is the thing that apparently the Wall Street Journal. I saw, Joe Scarborough, who's he's like what I would call an honest Republican,
Mm-hmm.
and he was outraged that the Wall Street Journal would compare the two candidates and say things like the awful thing that Biden had done was, you know, return money to students. In other words, uh, forgive debt on that level. How much of that do they do for business all the time? So why is that permissible?
That's
You know,
exactly the issues I'm talking about
like
that make me crazy.
unbelievably simple. It's like I remember back in the mortgage crash,
Mm-hmm.
mortgage companies were subsidized, banks were subsidized, but individuals weren't. And this was considered totally acceptable. It's not. I mean, both sides
Mm-hmm.
were participating in that hoax. In fact, the companies were more to blame because they were holding the money and they were
Mm-hmm.
violating their own rules. This goes on all the time and it's completely unfair. It needs to be addressed. And this is where people, like, even if you don't agree with her total understanding of it, but Elizabeth Warren, the one thing
Mm-hmm.
you know about her is she's protecting the consumer, and the consumer needs protection
I'm
because
I'm I'm more in Elizabeth's camp than anyone else's. But
yeah.
anyway, I will let you go.
All right.
Appreciate you coming by, and I'm going to drop you off the screen. Don't everybody else leave because there are 5 people who had questions.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Andre. No. Whoops. I'm having trouble. Oh, that's where the dots are. I'm not used to removing people. Bye. Okay. For the people who submitted, and I saw some in the questions, if you hang around, I will answer your questions. I will answer the questions I already have. So don't start typing one in because I know what time it is and I have to teach a class tonight. Okay. Never vibes. Am I going in the right direction? Okay. We're going to put you on the table and let you see your reading. It's really true. I have to teach a 2-hour class tonight, guys. So, okay. Am I moving in the right direction? My shuffling's a little awkward at the moment, guys, because my wrist is still hurting me. We found a couple things that work, but we don't have it solved yet. They can't figure out how I keep injuring it. So. If you're going in the right direction. Yes, it's going to turn out okay for you, but you're fighting against some stuff that was really a shock to you, and it has to do with work. You're not exactly sure right at this moment in time which direction to head in exactly, but you have all the strength you need. And if your direction has been to get out of where you are, that's probably the right answer, because this is my I'm out of here card. So what I see is there's been a big change going on around. You're totally right in being focused on that. And you can get out and that'll be fine. Okay. And then this is an interesting question. My work group arrived late at the Dead Sea for sunset, and the hotel owner opened the beach. They apparently don't let them out there at night, and they let us swim at night. I feel many times that when I lay down to sleep, I'm floating in that sea and looking up at the starry sky. I just read you the whole question. I had to shorten it because it wouldn't fit my little box. And she wants to know why. Well, I think I could tell you why. Most of us would give our right leg to be able to have a calming, reflective moment to fall back on. Apparently, you really, really connected to the universe that night. But let's see what's going on. So there's no reason for you to change this. It's not tied to anything bad. It is an old familiar memory that you can bring back and you can feel safe with it. That's what that card means. And you tend to be better at it when you're feeling a little disturbed during the day. You have this place you can go at night, and it's really your higher self got really connected into you, and you can recall that. And that's really beautiful. Yes. And got one more. How do things look financially for me in the next month? And there's a couple other people that wanted to ask that, and I'm going to go back. And these are people who posted to the when I put out the YouTube thing that I was doing the show today. How do things look financially for me in the next month? Okay. For RH, for me, they're going to, what do things look like? You're going to be, you've been riding in one direction, and you're trying to make a change of direction and with your finances, and you're listening and talking with someone. You need to get better control of your money, but you're going to meet the right people that can help you, or read the right article, or find the right thing because you're anticipating having to make a sudden change, and you want to be financially set for that. So I think it looks good for you in the next month. Comments. Okay, let's see where we're at. Hi, Jen Miranda. Showed up a little bit late. Okay. Okay, I'm getting up to, Andre's. We did that one. Somebody wants to see what the last 3 months look for you. By the way, I am starting, it's on my website. I'm starting to take appointments for your 2025 reading, which is January through December of 2025. And this year I'm going to limit it because last year I ended up with a whole bunch towards the very end because everybody kept putting it off. So you can go on there and I will start reading them in November, and which is not far. So this is a real quick look at Red Ruby's thing. Okay. You're going to realign your goals. You've been thinking about changing some of your belief systems. The problem is, I don't know what's wrong with your house, but you need to get it fixed, whatever that is. But you just don't feel like you have the power to do that right now. I think by the end of the year, you're going to be just wrapping up stuff that needs to get taken care of. Your belief systems are going to get shaken, but you've got the Star, which is a marvelous card. I think you're at a point where Red Ruby, you are in the process of creating new sets of goals for yourself, and you can do that and be comfortable at it. But there's some part inside of you that's hesitant about setting some of the goals you know you need to set now for yourself. Let me see. And I got this one. I think New Mexico's on this sheet. Yeah, New Mexico. We saw the Democrat winning, Linda. Heinrich. So get you off the screen. So I did ruby red. And Ness, I already answered your question. I know you put it in here too. Thank you. And all I can tell you is, if you get a ballot, as long as you mark any one of the races, they'll count it. And if you don't mark the guys that are below, they don't care. Texas used to always have straight ticket voting, so you could like hit them at the top and it would fill them all in. They changed that when they realized it was helping Democrats too much. Republicans liked it when there are only Republicans on the ballot, so people would hit R and they'd get a lot of votes. So you don't be worried. They're not, as long as you vote for someone that's on the ballot, that's all they need. CC wants a general reading for the next month. And thank you for being patient. I had been trying to get a hold of Andre. We couldn't connect, so I didn't think he was going to be here today. And then he showed up. So, I mean, obviously I have to send him the link and the invitation and all that stuff. I knew this morning that he was going to show up. Next month. Money. Wow. You've been trapped somewhere and you've been trying to make changes and you haven't been able to, but money's going to show up. Some change in value is going to show up. It's going to be a whole new job opportunity, I think. And you're going to be riding high and you're going to get out of a self-imposed situation. So that looks good. We all want to go hang around Cece because she's got good news coming. And that's the end of it. I'm switching back to me. And I'm going to pull a medicine card for everyone. Because really, it's true. If you hang around like-minded and spiritual people, I'm going to do a show next Thursday. I'm going to do the beginning of introducing you to Stephen Schwartz. He's really interesting. He's done a lot of work with what works for us and can make us positive. And I'm going to have him. I'm going to try and get him to come on my channel. I have more followers than he does, and he's talking about how he's trying to figure out how to increase that. But his stuff's really good. It's always extremely well documented. And you need to deal with truth and integrity. And that's page 32. Now I'll read to you about truth and integrity. Truth and integrity. When you've pulled this card, it highlights the importance of truth and integrity in your life and in how you handle things. And it's the card of summer. It's the card of warmth. It's essential you drop deep down into your heart and find your truth at this time. Then be strong in expressing your truth with a deep place of integrity. We often lack confidence to lay down healthy boundaries, and we live in places of pleasing others or hurting ourselves. When we don't follow the truth of our own self, we relinquish too much of our souls. And this says, everybody's trying to just not get in a fight with anybody. But in order to belong, you can have your truth and integrity. I was listening to one campaign consultant who said, you don't have to tell anybody else who you voted for in the booth, or if you got a mail-in ballot, you don't have to tell them anything. And this card is marked with turquoise, which helps you speak your own truth. It aids you in understanding your own feelings, and it also can assist you in helping draw healthy lines. So I think that's something we all can benefit from. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. And once again, I'm doing year readings. I still do my 3-month readings, my past life readings, and all that other good stuff. But I'm going to go off and rest for the afternoon. Have a good day.